Okay, so this is a talk titled Idle Games, the Mechanics and Monetization of Self-Playing Games. So let's get right into it. A quick introduction. I've been at Kongregate for about 6 years, directing our browser-based virtual goods business. Also recently picked up production for a mobile game called Adventure Capitalists, which actually just launched about 2 weeks ago. And we'll be talking about that quite a bit in this talk, as it is also an idle game. I also founded a studio called Level Up Labs, and we're probably best known for our game Defender's Quest and are currently working on a sequel. Kongregate. We are, if anyone is not familiar with us, an open platform for browser-based games with a variety of technologies. Basically anything that runs in the browser, we're happy to support. We have around 16 million, that might be a slightly old number, but somewhere around 16 million monthly unique visitors worldwide. Our demographic tends to be more of a core gamer demographic than you usually think of with browser-based games. Heavily male, average age about 22 years old. Popular genres are more MMOs, RPGs, collectible card games, not really as much of the casual and social games that you might see on other sites. We have a platform-level currency called creds that you can spend in our free-to-play games. And we were acquired by GameStop in July of 2010. We work with a variety of partners that are both Western and Eastern, big companies, small companies, have all published through us or distributed through us on the web. We also, in the last about year and a half or so, have become a mobile publisher. And these are some of our games. We have quite a few more that are out now and regularly launching. So that's kind of our core business. So that's the good background of where a lot of this data is coming from. So I want to open with a question for the audience. How many of you have played Cookie Clicker or some other idle game? Can you put up your hands? All right. I want you to leave, hold on. Leave your hands up if you have played what you would describe an embarrassing amount of it. All right. A lot of hands stayed up for that. Thank you. So that gives us 3 interesting pieces of information. One, almost every hand went up for the first question. These are very popular games. They're well known. A lot of people play them. 2, a lot of hands stayed up for playing an embarrassing amount, which means that people play them a lot and keep playing them. And 3, there is this sort of self-shame around them. People don't usually talk about playing games an embarrassing amount if it's like a really great game they're proud of, but there's this weird thing about idle games. So I want to kind of dig into all of that. So this is a game called Number. It was a kind of a spoof parody game Tyler Glyle created. You want to make your number go up. It goes up a certain speed. When you can afford more, you make it go up faster. It's boiled down to the most minimal level, and yet this is actually kind of compelling. I played this an embarrassing amount, to be frank. So why is that? What is it about this genre? And why are we talking about this in the first place? Well, for one, it's a birth of a new genre. We don't actually get to see that very often in the games industry. Probably the most recent one prior to this was maybe MOBAs, to see like kind of a legit new genre coming and becoming very popular. It's only about 2 years old in its modern form. And it is very popular. Right now, this is a screenshot of the top most played games on Kongregate in the last 30 days, and 3 of those top 5 are idle games. It's so popular, you actually can watch Twitch streams of self-playing games. Like, the guy's not even playing this. He's just running it through his browser, but it's like 6 people are actively watching this. 2,500 people have favorited this channel of a self-playing game without even a person there. They have fabulous retention stats. We'll look at some specific ones, but these are some of the best retaining games on all of Kongregate.com. And they actually generate really great revenue. The ARPUs, the lifetime values of these games, are well above most single-player games that we have, and actually are competing with a lot of our multiplayer games. Also, for those taking pictures, we'll post these slides on our website as well, so you're welcome to take pictures, but if you miss some, please don't worry about it. They'll be available afterwards as well. So I want to do a kind of a quick survey of the history and evolution of idle games to sort of understand how we've gotten to where we are. Probably the first one was Progress Quest by Eric Fredrickson in 2002. This was a parody of MMORPGs, and it was basically a character sheet that just ran itself. It's a 0-player game. You cannot interact with this even if you want to, outside of the character creation, which doesn't have any impact on the game. It's so much so that the Wikipedia page kind of cheekily puts quotes around the word game throughout it. It's not really interactive in any way, but it's still kind of, it was still popular. I mean, how many people have played Progress Quest? Right, okay? This is not a game you can play, but that many people are aware of it and have played it. So already we were seeing something interesting happening. Kongregate in particular actually ended up being sort of an early breeding ground for idle games, and I think the main reason is that we have a chat room that plays next to the games, and you can only be in chat if you have a game running. So there was this demand for games that people didn't actually want to play, they just wanted to be in chat, but you had to have something up. And so we started seeing games. The oldest one that has an idle tag is a game called Kongregate Chat. It was made just so you could chat and not really be playing a game. Not long after that, that was 2007, 2008, we started seeing some rudimentary RPGs appearing. Nowhere near the complexity of what we see in current idle games, but already this idea of a game that mostly plays itself with very little interaction was starting to occur. In 2009, probably our most popular early idle game was a game called Untitled, and this game got crazy. It was incredibly complicated. It had active elements and idle elements. It's actually really different from current idle games, but it did a lot of pioneering work in that concept. Tons of content. It's 6 years old, and they are still adding new features. Literally yesterday, he pushed out an update to it. So it's an incredible game and has been really popular for a very long time. Cow Clicker is one of the ones that got a lot of media attention. Ian Bogost was trying to really poke fun at Farmville and other kind of appointment games and social games. And so the idea was you got this cow, you would click it, and then you have to wait 6 hours, and then you can come back and click it again. And by click it, I mean one time. You only get one click per 6 hours. And that was about it. You could invite some friends, and if they clicked on their cow, you got some mooney. And you know, that was the entirety of the game. And much to Ian Bogost's surprise, it really caught on. And he ended up adding some more features to it and growing it out a little bit, and, but still trying to champion this idea that, you know, social games and farm games are silly, at least in his opinion. A quick mention, they're a bit different, but A Dark Room and Candy Box are, you know, idle games in many ways. There was a lot of progress that would happen without active interaction. But they actually are a bit different from most of what we're talking about now. They are finite, they can be beaten. They're a lot more puzzle-like and exploration based. They're great games, and I definitely recommend them if you haven't played them. But they are a little different from where this talk will be going. So Cookie Clicker, this is the one that really kicked it off. It was actually a parody of Candy Box, and got really popular, and Orteal was quoted as saying, you know, at first I couldn't tell if people were just going along with the joke or if they were actually being serious. It turns out they were being serious. You know, there was something, even though it was funny and you kind of enjoyed it, there was something extremely compelling about the system that he set up for it. And I forget what the number was, but like a ridiculous number of players played this game and continued to play this game. It was the first major mainstream hit of the genre, arguably creating it. So this is where I'm saying it's 2 years old, this is where it really came into its modern form. And it really established a basis for the progression, for the upgrading, for all of these tropes that we see mimicked in most of the current idle games. This was the game that really brought those into mainstream and kind of solidified them. Adventure Capitalist was a kind of an experiment by Cody Vieg, who worked at Hyper Hippo Games. And it turned out to be really popular, and Hyper Hippo then put more people onto it. But it's really a parody of capitalism and idle games. And you notice I've been saying parody a lot. This is sort of a genre that almost doesn't want to exist. It's a joke, really, but it keeps, despite itself, being really successful. And so you actually see a lot of humor in a lot of these games, and that's a reason for it. It was one of the first that I'm aware of to introduce offline progress. So unlike Cookie Clicker, where you had to have it running your browser all the time, this one would calculate the time between your last login and just give you credit for everything you would have earned. This was really freeing. Now you don't have to dedicate your CPU to watching, you know, little pointers clicking a cookie. You could just close it down, come back the next day. And I think that was actually a big advantage for it. And it's now actually standard in most idle games. And it was also just really fun to look at. There was a lot of animation, bars filling up. Everyone loves bars filling up. So it was really compelling. Clicker Heroes, 2014. This is one that was a lot more RPG-like. You hired heroes, you leveled them up, you gained skills, and you know, your progress was measured, or your power was measured in DPS, damage per second. They added an addition of cooldown skills. Again, this added some strategy and action elements to it. And it had really great visuals and presentation, and they didn't actually put all of that into the idle game. This was all repurposed assets from one of their MMORPGs, but it made it one of the best-looking idle games of the time. And then Tap Titans is not by Play Stores, but is kind of a close derivative that you may have seen on mobile that is very similar to Clicker Heroes, but did a really great job kind of bringing that into mobile. All right, almost done with the history. Make It Rain was probably the first big mobile success. And a lot of that, I think, was just this hilarious concept. You'd sit there and you'd flick your finger over it like you're making it rain with dollar bills. And it was very viral. A lot of word of mouth. People just wanted to show each other this great concept, and I think that helped it really take off. The idle elements were actually really limited. You could only collect so much money, and then you'd have to come back in to get it, and it would stop collecting once you got to a point. So you had to really check in regularly. I had a very aggressive ad strategy where ads were popping up all the time. Because you're doing this motion, you'd actually click on them. It was very clever, but I think it actually probably wore down the players a fair amount. It was kind of annoying, too. So I'm sure it was a great success for a while, but I bet it hurt their longer-term retention. I don't have the data to prove that, though. And they also had this pretty brutal like FBI monetization. So the FBI would occasionally show up. They would declare you guilty. And you would lose not only a hunk of cash, but actually a hunk of your cash per second, which in an idle game is a really big deal. And you'd have to bribe them with real-world money to not lose that. And that's actually what kind of like stopped me from playing the game. Is once I hit that, that was such a negative thing that I just didn't want to go on. So that's a very, very aggressive monetization strategy. It may have worked well, but again, I think it hurt the long term. Bitcoin Billionaire was another great mobile game. Apple loved it. It has really nice style, tone, and the topic was fun and very current. The presentation is really good. Just kind of general design is really nice on it. And one of the best things about it is its opt-in ads. This was one, a lot of times people cite Disco Zoo as great opt-in ads. This one I think also is really worth studying. If you're ever going to be working with opt-in ads on mobile, look at the many, many ways that they do it. And we'll actually look at a few of them later on in the talk, but it's something that Bitcoin did really nicely. They, similarly to Make It Rain, had really strong appointment mechanics, very limited offline progress, and it was actually offline progress was one of their central monetization elements. I think this was actually a mistake on them, and we'll talk about why a little bit later. Two quick notable entries that aren't really as well known, but DripStat is really just a cookie clicker clone, but it had amazing visualization. You could really understand what was contributing to what. It has a global live leaderboard, so if you look in like the top left area here, I can see my global ranking, and every time I drip more bytes into the machine, I'd actually see my rank move up. And there was actually even real-time contributions from other players. So you can see this plus 1 gigabyte from user, whatever that is. That's not me. That's someone else that has just done that in real time. So even though it's a single-player game, you get this feeling that you're playing in a world with other people. And that was something that I haven't seen done much in idle games, and this one did really nicely. And the other one I want to mention, Swarm Simulator, has only been out for a couple of weeks, at least on Kongregate. I'm not sure where it started earlier than that. It explores a new kind of funnel-based economy, so they're actually playing around with a different way of doing the idle game economies that's really interesting. Even though it's only a couple weeks old, it's proving to be extremely popular. So in the last couple of weeks, it's been played 1 million times on Kongregate alone. So I think we actually probably will see this one catching on a lot. You probably will hear about it if you haven't already. I definitely recommend checking it out. It's really nice, even though it's, like a lot of these, just sort of a glorified spreadsheet with some really neat mechanics in it. So, speaking of idle game core mechanics, what makes these games so interesting? What is unique about them compared to most other games? Progress without interaction. This is sort of the most basic thing about idle games is where they get their name, right? And I should say, I'm saying idle games, you'll often hear incremental games used as well. If you hop on Reddit, you can get into a very long argument about this. I'm going to use them fairly interchangeably and not address that debate. So progress without interaction, it's a low-pressure experience. You don't have to be constantly playing. If you go away for a while and you come back, that's okay. You got some stuff. You can keep going. It's a very kind of positive growth, positive feedback. Everything is going up, right? There's no lose conditions. You might not go as fast as other people, but you constantly feel like you're making progress. And quick check-ins can be very profitable. Every time you check in and you buy a couple of things, it shifts up your curve so that you're gaining faster, and then you go away for a while, and you've actually made a lot of progress even with a very short check-in. And this is really good for social and especially mobile interactions. When you're looking for that, like, I want to pull it out for a minute, make a couple of decisions, and put it away, this type of system is great for that. So what this actually does is it creates a celebratory moment every time you come back to the game. And a lot of these will actually call it explicitly. So they'll say, like, welcome back. You just earned a ridiculous amount of money. You should spend it. And so it creates this positive feedback of, oh, man, I just came back. I get to spend all this stuff. This is a lot of fun. And beyond that, the longer you're away, the bigger the reason to return. So if you've been gone for a week or so, you don't feel like in some games you've fallen behind. Here you've actually gotten ahead, right? And if you go back, you're going to have even more money to spend. And so here where I was gone 5 hours instead of a day, I get a lot more being gone for a day. So forced appointment mechanics, I would actually say, are unnecessary. Players naturally want to come back because of the way the system works. And that's a really kind of magical thing. So, even daily rewards I don't see used in these games. And, maybe they could be, but the fact is they don't really need it because the retention's already off the charts. So here is a chart of retention, D1, 7, I think 14 and 30, or no, 30 and 90, sorry. The actual numbers don't really matter, but, and you'll notice our D1s look kind of low. This is the top 10 monetizing games of 2014 on Kongregate. The D1s look low compared to what you see on mobile, and that's because there's a lot less friction when you go to play a browser game. You don't have to install it, you just check out the page. So what I'm doing this is to give kind of a sense of sort of a baseline of some of our best performing games. And then now I'm going to pop on our 3 idle games that have in-app purchases in them. You'll notice they dwarf all of our other best performing games. So the retention is amazing on these games. There's something really special happening there. And that's, again, without daily rewards, without saying you have to come back to check in, without any kind of forced mechanics to bring players back. Another core mechanic is the rapid growth of costs and power and rewards in the game. So this leads to a sense of progress. It's psychologically fun and satisfying. That's what number was, right? Your number is going up. We like collecting things. We like advancing. We like improving ourselves. And these really, really get into it and do it at sort of a ridiculous level. Adventure Capitalist actually writes out the words fully. And you end up sort of speaking a new language as you play this game. As you learn what the next multiple of 1,000 is called, the duo quadragentillion. That actually starts to make sense to you as you play the game. Other games will just flat out use scientific notation because the numbers are just getting so outrageous. But it's also just really fun to have that kind of growth, and it's a sort of a level of growth you don't usually experience in games. We actually couldn't even, for Adventure Capitalists, the Game Center leaderboards don't support numbers that big. We had to take a logarithm just to record high scores. So the core loop of these games is you log in, you spend all your cash, and then you log out and you come back a few hours later and do it again. Now, that sounds kind of familiar. That's what we see in social games and in energy games, right? You get a certain amount of energy, you spend it all, and then you leave, and the energy comes back, and then you go do it again. But the difference is energy games are this forced mechanic that's put on top of the core game. While with idle games, it has this sort of natural energy system without the need for an energy currency. And this ends up being a lot more palatable to players, and especially kind of like the core gamers who rebel against the social games and the Facebook games. We find that they really are perfectly happy with this kind of a setup. And I think there's a few reasons for that. It has a real-world analog. It makes sense, right? Like, you're not dealing with lightning bolts that are just kind of like added onto it. It's like, oh, I'm out of cash. I can't buy anything else. That makes sense to me, so I'm just going to come back later when I've got more cash. Additionally, the player takes ownership over this decision. The game is not saying you can't do anything else. You could sit there and you could wait and actively play it and probably buy something in 5 minutes or so, but you as the player say, I could wait, but my time's more worthwhile than this. I'm not going to sit here and watch this. I'm just going to come back later. And so it overall is just sort of a better experience, a cleaner experience, and one that comes out of the natural mechanic rather than something artificially put on top of it. It also counterbalances offline play. So you get big rewards, but those rewards grow linearly. And so time actually loses value without interaction. So let's take a look at that, what that means. So here is a curve. This is an exponential growth where it's saying across the bottom we have like game sessions. And basically, in this case, I'm roughly assuming game sessions is kind of a once-a-day thing. And every day you get about 10x as powerful as the previous day. And that's totally normal in idle games, if not even a little slow. It's also impossible to read like this, so we're going to do a log scale instead. So we can make it a little more linear and understand it. So now, if you're playing once a day, every day, under this kind of rough approximation, then your daily progress is going to be right in line with that, right? Now, if you were to play on the first day and then wait 7 days and come back, on that, a week later, instead of having this is a little weird, but on your second game session, if you're playing every day, you're going to have about 100, 10 times what you had before. Here, you have 700. You were gone for 7 days, so you collected 100 for 7 days. What this means, though, is even though you were gone for 7 days, your actual, is that showing up? Yeah, okay. Your actual amount of cash only puts you at about where day 3 would be for someone who was playing every day. So even though you were gone for a week, it's not like you're a week ahead of people who are playing actively. You're actually only part way to where the next session would have been anyway. And the thing is, this keeps going. If you're gone for a month, so you're gone for 30 days, yeah, that gets you up to your 3,000, but that's still only somewhere around the day 3 of someone who's actively playing. You can go away for a year, come back 365 days later, and oh, look, you're sitting somewhere in the 4th session. So what this means is that you don't have to cap off-learn spending, or off-learn earnings. And that's why I think these forced appointment mechanics, but beyond the fact that they're not necessary from a retention standpoint, they're not even necessary from a game standpoint. The math makes it, sorry, I'm a math major, so I think this is really cool. The math makes it so that offline progress, as linear progress, becomes irrelevant because your growth is actually exponential. So you can let the players keep earning lots, and they're going to feel great. I come back 7 days, I have tons of cash compared to where I was, but in terms of the progress of the game, they're actually not getting that far. And this gives you the freedom as a developer to not be forcing them to do things, to let them kind of experience it on their own, and to let the math control the progress. Something else you tend to see in a lot of these games is tons of goals and achievements. Lots of unlocks. This, Venture Capitalist has 500 unlocks right now. They're adding more all the time. Part of this is providing moments of joy throughout the game. I mean, the core game is you're making your number go up, right? And at some point that gets kind of boring. But if you're getting little achievements and little bursts of speed throughout, that helps break it up a little bit. It also gives you the ability to have moment-to-moment optimizations. So you may be deciding, in this example, you have one thing that you can get here. If you get to 2,000 newspapers, you'll get times 15 on your pizza deliveries. Or if you get to 2,200, you can get times 3 on your car washes. Well, you're making a decision now, like which one should I try to go for, which one's going to be the better optimization. And so you actually do have some decisions that, at least temporarily, are meaningful. They min-max a little bit. Long term, yeah, you'll be able to afford it, but you're going to be able to afford things faster if you play more optimally. So it actually gives some strategy to the player rather than just number go up faster. Prestiging, or kind of New Game Plus. Anyone know where the term New Game Plus comes from? Sorry? Anyone? It's Chrono Trigger. I did not know that until I was researching this, but apparently that was the first one to ever use the term. Sorry, random trivia. Now you know. So you get to choose to reset your game to kind of get a boost the next time through. So this one's Tap Titans, and it's not a force. You can do it whenever you want, but you kind of get the options like, all right, now I want to do a reset. I'm going to get some bonus. I'm going to completely start over, but you're going to do it with more power, and you're going to accelerate through the early part of the game. And this is really, really central to especially the most successful idle games. It provides a strategic decision to the player. So a lot of the little min-max decisions, like, those are nice, they're fun, and there's some opportunity there, but when to reset is a really, really important decision. Do I reset when I'm going to double my speed, or do I do it at 1.5 times and try to do that repeatedly at a faster rate and hope that it stacks on top more than the doubles go? There are long discussions in forums about this. There's a group of math majors that I'm working with at a university that are trying to model this out and to pick out the best strategies for idle games. Like, it's actually an interesting question and a really good strategic opportunity. It's often tied to a separate currency. So in this previous shot, you can see like you earn these relics based on your progress. And you're only earning like 5 or 10 relics, despite the fact that you have some octillion damage per second that you're doing there. And so this actually lets you transform exponential growth back to linear. So now you're getting back into sort of actual gameplay progression. You're sort of taking a log of your progress. And so the players are seeing all these giant numbers, but you as a game developer get to turn it back into something that's a bit more linear and more controlled. And this also leads to a new gameplay loop. You start getting faster, and like your core loop of buying all your upgrades and getting through it then gets wrapped around or wrapped within this idea of prestiging. And sometimes you're prestiging like once a day for some of these games. And that becomes a second, almost core loop as fast as it goes. And players get into a rhythm, and it's really fun. So let's go back to our exponential growth curve. We take our log of it. Now, in the last one, we said that your progress was basically right in line with the power there. But when you start doing a prestige loop, your costs are going up that way, but your earnings are going to be a little bit below that, right? So early on, you're going to be earning above the cost, but then it's going to trail off, and you're going to be unable to progress. This is not a hard wall. The game is not saying you have to progress, but it's going to start feeling slower and slower, and the player is going to be getting a little bit bored, and so they get the option to do a prestige. Now, when you do a prestige, you're multiplying, and I think by 3 in this case, you're going to multiply your earnings. So, boom, now you're taking the exact same earnings line, like nothing has changed in the balance, but you've shifted it up. And what this means is that the early part of the game is going to accelerate. You're going to fly through that early stuff, and you're going to get farther than you did before, but then you're going to start trailing off again. You're going to hit a different soft wall, and at some point you're going to decide, okay, it's time to prestige again. And you can keep doing this, and you're going to keep progressing through the content of the game, but you do it in this kind of repeat way. And it creates this interesting loop that's really fun for players. It's this ladder climbing idea. Each time you're going a rung higher, even though you're starting over. And it gives this amazing sense of progress. It's one of the greatest rushes of an idle game. As many of you know, if you got into Cookie Clicker, you do your prestige, and then all of a sudden you get to buy everything. And it's incredibly fun. It's a really good player experience, and it's a core part of the game progression. Regular updates. This seems like a weird thing I call a mechanic. I guess it's more of a quality that we've identified. But because, I think in large part, because the games are fairly simple, there's not a lot of assets, it's all just kind of like spreadsheets and balance and UI, UX, you actually can iterate on it fairly quickly. And what we've seen, so this is the Swarm Simulator release log. That's like every day, all of the, he's putting out a release with, not just like a minor fix, like, a fair amount. And what we've actually seen is that, I think I can actually say every single highly successful idle game on Kongregate has had a rapid release cycle of like every couple days they'll do something new. It's, I don't know that it's necessary, but it is a very clear observation that we've seen. The players react well to it. With math this weird, like trying to get the balance right is really hard, so being able to iterate on that is actually kind of important. It's just something that we've seen over and over again is a quality that has been a part of success for idle games. Make it bumpy. So this was kind of interesting. This was a story from Cody Vieg, who is the Adventure Capitalist designer. Originally, he did a very smooth progression curve, and it turns out that was really boring. You know what's coming. There's no surprise and delight associated with it. So you have your cost curve and your earnings curve, and it's totally flat. You know exactly what you're going to do. And so he ended up intentionally screwing up the curve, and that made it a lot more interesting. You make it bumpy, and you're going to have areas of rapid acceleration when things are going really well, and then you're going to have kind of slow parts. And this provides variety. It keeps it interesting. You don't know exactly what's going to come next, and that's actually fun to discover. And then when you start prestiging, the intersection points, also change. And so again, you're going to have different points where things are going to be happening, things are going to be going really fast, and they're fun, and other parts where they slow down a little bit, and maybe you ease off, come back a day later, and then you can get back into it. It just makes the whole process a lot more interesting. So we actually see a lot of these elements in other games. Like, many of them are not unique to idle games. So like in real-time social and strategy games, you do often see progress while gone, though often with hard caps. So in Heyday, you're seeing your farm is growing, but only the stuff that you planted. And if you go away for weeks, it's no better than going away for however long your longest timer is. Mafia Wars, kind of like the energy-based games, same type setup. And even Game of War, there we go. Game of War, you have all your earnings, but there's also a max storage that you can have. So there is still this idea of earning while you're gone, and that's still fun for players, but they all cap it out in a way that I think misses out a little bit on an opportunity there that putting some math into the exponential growth could fix, though it would be a little bit weird in these two. Chinese MMORPGs. So there's a current trend of becoming very heavily autoplay. Players, and especially Chinese players, are really, really savvy at MMORPGs. They want to get through the early part very quickly and get to the end game where it gets really interesting, the strategy and the min-maxing. And they can, these games even can include an AFK mode. So this is a game called Mythborn. Looks like an action RPG, and in large part is, but if you see, it says autopath at the top. You start playing the game, and it just starts running off. It kills people for you. Then it runs back, accepts a quest. It's all doing it automatically for you. And in large part, this is like an idle game, right? It's running on its own, and you're just kind of watching it and making occasional decisions. It's about min-maxing stats. It's about collecting equipment and putting the right things together. And it's really interesting. It's really deep. But what we see is that Western audiences often don't react well to it. And I think this is in large part a problem with expectation management. You see this game that looks like an action RPG, and you're expecting an action RPG, but then you're getting this, something that functions more like an idle game. And so even players who love idle games often don't like MMORPGs that play like idle games. So, these are interesting games to study for some of the stuff that they do when it comes to min-maxing, when it comes to optimization. But there's this weird thing, psychological thing, where they don't necessarily set the expectations properly, and especially Western audiences who aren't used to it can sometimes have a negative reaction to it. And then launch games. So I'm sure you've seen these games around where you launch something, you collect some cash, and you buy some upgrades, and you launch it again. That sounds kind of familiar, right? It's actually a type loop prestige system. You don't actually have choice over when you're going to do your prestige. It's when you land. But the idea is still the same. You do some, your core loop, you get to the end, you've gained some resources, you spend them, and then the next time it's like that ladder rung. You're getting farther each time. And I think that's part of the reason that launch games are so much fun. It's that same idea of continuing growth. And we just see that in idle games is like stretched out a little bit with a little more choice. But the mechanic is still actually very similar. So these games actually do monetize. And I'll admit, it surprised me a little bit when, I think Adventure Capitalist was the first one that called me up. It was like, hey, can we put in-app purchases in the game? I'm like, yeah, I guess, but I don't know if anyone's going to buy them. I am not always right, and I was happy to be wrong in that one. So what can you sell in an idle game? I mean, really, the game is just making a number go up, right? How can you monetize that? Well, you can sell a cash infusion. Let's just get a burst of cash right away. It's usually a percentage of whatever your current rate of income is. That way it's always going to be relevant to you wherever you are. Or sometimes they just flat out call it a time warp. So you can say, all right, let's jump ahead 24 hours, and you'll get whatever cash you would have earned, all of your cooldowns finish off. And that's actually kind of compelling for someone who wants to just jump ahead. Maybe they're really close to something. They'll say, oh, okay, I'll pay $1 to get ahead. I mean, that's a fairly common mechanic that we see in a lot of things. It's a speed up. You can also, some of them will sell permanent speed multipliers. Adventure Capitalist did this, where you could buy a ×3 multiplier that just did a permanent ×3 on everything you earned. Now, that's fun, and you accelerate faster, but also because of the way the exponential growth works, this isn't quite as much, I mean, it doesn't progress you through the game as fast as you might think. So it's fun for players, and they do go faster, but it also doesn't completely break the game, which was kind of interesting. Instant prestige. So usually you reset and start over, right? But we actually see games that'll say, okay, you can get all of your currency, but you can stay where you are. And that's very compelling for players who, especially on games that have longer prestige loops, being able to say, okay, I'm going to collect everything and keep going. That actually can be really, really effective. Protection against negative events. So, in Make It Rain, we saw the bribe money that can keep the FBI off your back. In Tap Titans, you can actually lose heroes for periods of time, but you can also buy a shield to protect them. So that's out there. Gacha system. We'll talk about this one a little bit, but Clicker Heroes actually has a gacha system in it. Or for those who aren't familiar with it, this is like random draws, like a collectible card game kind of thing. And even like event currencies. So in Adventure Capitalist, they ran a holiday event where you were collecting candy canes, you could open presents, and you could actually buy things that would increase your candy cane production, that would get you more presents, that would earn these unique things that you could only get during the event. Very similar to something like The Simpsons Tapped Out or Family Guy Quest for Stuff, where they have event currencies and specific things there. You can still apply that to an idle game, and they have done that. You do see banners and interstitial ads. So Bitcoin Billionaire did this really clever thing. I don't know how readable that is, but it says basically, we're going to give you a bonus if you let us show you a banner ad. And so you say, oh, cool. And you actually ask them. It's like, yes, please show me a banner ad. And a banner ad pops up, and then you play and earn some more cash. To the player, it's I think the only opt-in banner ad I've seen before. You see a lot of like opt-in video ads. When you do an opt-in ad, like an actual opt-in ad, you'll often get like a short burst of cash, some small bit of premium currency, brief, powerful boost, a relief of a negative status, or even like a kind of a longer term but lower boost. The relief of the negative status, so another example from Bitcoin Billionaire, someone divided by 0, you're going to lose a quarter of all of your bytes. So this actually feels a lot like the FBI thing from Make It Rain, but they allow you to just watch an ad to get around it. So it's still that negative experience, but it's not nearly as punishing for the player. It's really just saying, hey, you had a bad luck, now you have to watch 15 seconds of Kate Upton. So it works out, it's a little more palatable. So we're going to do a couple of case studies real quick of games that are on Kongregate that the developers very kindly said that we could share some numbers for. I'm only sharing per user numbers, so no total revenue or anything like that, but at least some insight as to how games are performing. So Idling to Rule the Gods. This is one guy created this game. It's not a high production game, but it definitely has some really interesting systems. Branched out with some new mechanics. It was at a time that we were seeing a lot of direct clones of Cookie Clicker and Adventure Capitalist, and this did some different things that players reacted well to. Like any of them, very rapid iteration, adding tons of new stuff. Made a lot of UI changes, so this was kind of the old UI. The new one's not drastically different, but there were a lot of UI or UX changes where there were more options, there were easier things for players to do. Like players would ask for features and he would just do it, and the players loved that. They loved that it felt like it was growing and improving all the time. He probably should get an art budget, but that's okay. Sorry, that was mean. there were a lot of really complicated interactions in this game, and deep, dense systems that players are digging into, and that's really, really fun for them. Crazy math to calculate your attack is your battle plus your creating strength over 2 plus physical over 4 divided by 943, which he surfaces to the players so they can start optimizing that, right? And that's, that kind of depth is always going to be fun for players who want to try to min-max. The monetization in the game is heavily focused on god power. This is basically their premium currency. And you can either keep the god power and use it to provide multipliers to different areas of the game, or you can spend it and get permanent multipliers. But the permanent boosts tend to be what players react really well to, in this game in particular. They do have some temporary boosts where you could do like a 90-minute boost or even like a boost until you prestige again. And those sell decently, but it's only about 12% of the revenue. So it's really the kind of the permanent boost or the kind of investment side that we see selling best for this particular game. Just to share a couple of charts, this is the lifetime percent buyers on Kongregate. The first part was some testing data, so please ignore the early part of that, but ends up somewhere around 1.3% buyer rate. So as perspective, usually we see games kind of like, you're doing okay if you're about 0.5%. Good games are usually doing 1 to 2% purchase rates. A few games will do 3% or higher. So he's actually got a pretty good, if not a bit above average, purchase rate on the game. And the lifetime average revenue per paying user, so this is lifetime, not monthly or daily or anything like that, but the average per paying user is sitting around $25. And that's actually quite good, especially for a single-player game. A lot of our single-player games will get $5 or $10 for a premium version or somewhere in that range. So to get players spending $25 on average for those who decide to spend is actually quite good, and overall leads to a pretty decent LTV for the game. Clicker heroes. So this one, a couple of things that it does really interesting. It does a great job of spreading value across heroes. So a lot of times, all of your old investments or your older things that you get become irrelevant very quickly. And this one actually makes them relevant much later in the game. It keeps it interesting, keeps you kind of like on your toes in terms of what you're going to focus on. The use of RPG-like cooldowns, as I said before, it provides these kind of like quick action gameplay and some strategy. You can see that this list of, these are the cooldowns right here. And so you have sorry, I can't quite read it here, but this is the one that I think gives you more damage for like 30 seconds or something, and then it has a cooldown for a few hours. And they can monetize this cooldown, say quick, you can get your cooldowns back immediately. But it also is just fun. Like you log in and all of your stuff's cooled down, and then you decide like you're gonna go up to the next boss, and you fire them off in the right order. You want the doubler to go right before the click boost that goes then before the higher counter order. I don't know if I'm doing the order right, but there's actually a little bit of strategy behind it. Which is fun for people who, appeals to RPG players. Their prestige system involves a currency that has a trade-off between your DPS bonus and your, the summoning of these ancients. So you get these hero souls that increase your DPS, but you can also spend those to get these cool bonuses. And so it becomes this idea not just when do I prestige, but how do I spend my prestige points, and if so, how do I do that? More interesting questions for the player. So again, the core loop is mostly a self-playing game, but once you start making these bigger decisions, it's actually very interesting decisions for the player to engage in. In terms of monetization, they have the cash infusion and the instant prestige that are pretty standard in idle games, which are those first two that you see here. +1 ascension and get the hero souls right away. But they also have this +3 random gilded heroes. And this is one of the innovations they really brought in. This is a very simple but effective gacha system. These are all of the heroes you can earn in the game, and you can draw what's called a gilded hero, which makes that hero do +50% damage permanently. And you can gild multiple times, so +100%, +150%. This is fun from a collection standpoint. You ideally would want all of your heroes gilded, and then because you can buy multiple times, you can actually get it so that you want to still keep making purchases and getting these random gildings so that you can increase your power overall. And because they did a good job of balancing the characters to be relevant throughout, even if you get some of the the lower end ones, those are going to be relevant to you at times as well. So this was really cool. It allows for multiple purchases. So looking at their numbers, their lifetime percent buyer ended up a good bit better than even idling to rule the gods at almost 3%. That's a very strong percent buyer rate on Kongregate. And I think in large part due to the gacha system, they actually ended up in a similar $25 ARPU. So doing really well, especially with the extra buyer percentage in terms of LTVs on the site. All right, last case study. We're getting through it. Venture capitalist. So this really appealed to both browser and mobile audiences. We were able to take it to mobile, got some great features from Apple and Google, which was awesome. it has a really heavy use of the theme, the tone, and the humor in the game. So these are some of the managers you can get. And you can see W.W. Heisenberg is the car wash manager, and Forrest Trump runs the shrimp business. And it's a Canadian game, so you have this Jim Thornton joke in here too, for anyone that's a Tim Horton fan. So that humor really, really resonates with players. They like seeing what are the names of the managers coming up, what are the new upgrades coming. And that turned out really, really nice for just kind of some word of mouth and some retention, but just in general, keeping the style of the game going. One thing that I think we did really well with it was have a really effective ad implementation. So the player, we don't pop this up automatically. The player will have a little button they can press, and this will pop up and say, hey, you're looking for a boost, you can get 4 hours times 2 all of your income if you watch this ad. And you can only watch 5 of these per day. And so it fits the theme well. Like it's very tongue-in-cheek, like, hey, will you watch this for us and we'll do something for you? Like we really kind of play up the story behind it. It provides high value to the player. You get to double your income for 4 hours. It's relatively scarce, so you're not watching ads constantly. And so we may be leaving some impressions on the table, but the players are actively making sure that they can get in and watch as many of those ads as possible to hit their daily quota. Which I also think helps, it's only been out for a couple of weeks, so we don't know, exactly, but I think it's going to help not get player fatigue around the ads to sort of limit it a little bit. It does have some bugs, and people will complain to us that they can't watch ads. And I feel like there's no better way to know that we did the ads well than to have people say, hey, I can't watch your ads, fix it. Like, okay, cool, we'll work on that, but that's awesome. This is our store, and it has kind of the angel claim is the instant prestige. You can buy the ×3 multiplier, and they have a time warp. The ×3 multiplier is extremely compelling. You spend, I think, $2, and you get this permanent ×3 multiplier, and that converts extremely well. I'll show you the conversion rates in just a second. But it is one of the highest buyer percentages on all of Kongregate.com. You also can unlock bulk multipliers over time. So there you see, the ×3 is the highest one you can get. Well, we actually, as you buy the ×3, you unlock another one, and it actually keeps going. So we have, ×12, ×27, I forget what that one was, and then 501 is the highest one. So players who are, especially the bigger spenders, are kind of like curious, like, how high does this go? And we'll have people who will go up and just like kind of find out how big it goes, and then they get the big multiplier and have fun with that as well. So I said they had a good buyer rate. Remember, Clicker Heroes was doing well at almost 3%. Yeah, they're sitting at like almost 8%. It's fallen off a little bit as we got some wider promotion and played around a little bit with pricing. But 6-7% is phenomenal for in terms of the Kongregate standards. So that ×3 buyer rate, I think, is initial purchase is a really big part of that. And the lifetime ARPPU, because it has such a high buyer percentage, and a lot of people are just buying that ×3, you do see the ARPPU is a bit lower, but it has been heading up as we've been doing a lot of optimization, providing some deeper spend opportunities, adding some opportunity for to like engage in the holiday events. There was this flat period right here, and there were actually no updates were added to the game, and people just stopped spending, as you would expect. So, just like any other game, live servicing is very important to a successful idle game, and you will see revenue flatten out if you're not supporting it. In this case, they were actually working on the mobile version of it, but the web stats, faltered until we started paying attention to web again.
What platform is that?
This is all of these charts are for Kongregate.com. We were happy to see that the mobile retention has held up well so far. Again, we've only been out for 2 weeks, so I only have so much data, but D1 retention sitting somewhere around 55–60%. So, looks like the theory that good retention, that maintained on mobile. Our D7, again, we don't have a lot of data yet, but that's sitting somewhere around 35%, which we are extremely happy with. So, yeah, they retain well on web and retain well on mobile. Mobile ARPPU also held up. So this is a cohort chart of Kongregate data. And the reason I broke out the cohorts is because we made some monetization changes. And so you'll see the ARPPU was actually pretty low for people who joined a few months ago, or like a while ago. But in the last few months, the ARPPUs have been sitting somewhere around $12 to $15. On iOS, we're looking at around $18 ARPPU right now. And Android, we're sitting somewhere around $13. So we're seeing pretty consistent spending patterns across each of the platforms. The buyer percentages are different because of a variety of things around friction and having credit card access and that kind of thing. But in terms of depth of spend for those who decide to spend, it actually is relatively consistent across each platform. All right. and last couple. So spender categories. You'll recognize this as a type of chart that Kongregate often does. So we wanted to break out what spenders look like for these games. And so what this chart is that readable up there? Somewhat. Okay. So this is by how much they've spent. So this orange section here is people who have spent less than $10 on the game. And then it kind of goes around 10 to 50, oh, sorry, went out of order, 50 to 100, all the way up to these tiny little slivers of $100 to $500 and $500 or more on the game. And so we have this chart for Clicker Heroes and Idling to Rule the Gods. Adventure Capitalists, remember, had a really good conversion rate, but a lot of those conversions were at like a single purchase, and so that's why you see that really, really big percentage of people only spending under $10. While Clicker Heroes and Idling to Rule Gods, I had to check a couple of times. I thought it was the same chart, but they actually are slightly different. But they have remarkably similar numbers. But it's interesting. I mean, it's important to look. The vast majority are the under 10 to 50, with just these tiny little slivers of the 50 to 500 group in all of them, right? Now, each of these games has multiple $1,000 plus spenders. So, just like any other game, you do have big spenders. If you want to find out more about big spenders, Kongregate CEO Emily Greer is giving a talk about them tomorrow. So I'm not going to talk about them here, but that's a good talk, and I'll just plug her. Yeah, so we do see big spenders even in these idle games. But if we were to take this, so this is distribution by how many players have spent in those groups. If we now go and instead look at how the revenue distribution looks, I'll go ahead and pop all three of them up there. So the small groups are contributing a relatively small percentage of the actual revenue. And sorry, this is hard for me to see down here. You end up seeing that the groups of the $50, $150, and $500, or sorry, $100 to $500 and $500 plus are actually contributing rather large percentages, and actually most of the revenue outside of the venture capitalists to these games. So just like on any of the other successful games that we see, pretty much every successful game we see through in-app purchases, especially outside of the casual, well, even in casual, big spenders drive a lot, if not most, of the revenue. So these games, they monetize, you have to live service them, the retention's very similar. Like, they ultimately are just like any other successful game or game as a service in terms of really all of the numbers that we see. And that, it's not really just an idle game. They are games that are compelling and fun and work just like every other game. So just a couple of kind of like wrap-ups, like, what's next, make some kind of random predictions. I think the classic kind of spreadsheet-like idle games are probably going to start to lose favor. Players have seen a lot of them. We're starting to see some more sophisticated visualization and presentation. So, the kind of like easy, jump in and create a quick idle game is probably starting to run out as we're seeing better production values and people take more note of the genre. I think we'll be seeing idle spin-offs of games and brands. Clicker Heroes, for example, was a spin-off of Cloudstone by Playsaurus. There's an Adventure Quest Dragons spin-off that's actually, I don't know exactly what the relationship was, but when you load it up, it says, like, partnered with Clicker Heroes. So, I'm sorry, partnered with Cookie Clicker. So somehow they work together to do this spin-off game. And I imagine we'll see kind of more of those occurring. I think idle is going to become sort of a genre modifier like RPG. You've got your action RPG, your strategy RPG, your tactics RPG. Well, you could have idle tactics, action idle RPG, idle match 3. In fact, idle match 3 has been done. So this was, Puzzle Fuzz, which was Andrew Pellerano is one of our internal developers, and he created an idle match 3 game. So this little bar at the top here fills up on its own and will match that color, and you can interact and you can play faster than it, but it will run on its own. If you go away, it'll keep matching for you, and you're basically charging up these little characters that are going over and trying to break their friends free from that amber gel thingy. But you can just apply a lot of these idle game ideas to other genres, just like RPG ideas. And I think, and where that kind of goes from there is that idle design philosophies are going to start getting integrated into the metagames of other types of genres. Not all of this will work. Exponential growth is going to be weird in some games, but I think you gain a lot from these types of energy system approaches, these types of positive progress and feedback, and trying to find ways to bring that into other genres, I think is a good bit of where the future is. And that's, I certainly would encourage everyone to try making an idle game if you want. It's fun, it's relatively quick, but trying to figure out how to bring some of this into other genres, I think is what I'd really like to see some people do, and we haven't really seen yet. So that's my talk. Here's some contact information. You can check out our developer website. If you have browser game questions or mobile game questions, those are your kind of best contacts, and then my email address. Cool. So I guess we can open up for questions. Do we have time for that? Thank you. Yeah, please come up to the mics if you'd like to ask. Also, just a quick shout out. If you enjoyed the talk, please give me a good rating. If you didn't, yeah, go ahead and fill it out because I'd like to at least learn from it. But doing these evaluations is really helpful. It helps us learn. And also, if you enjoyed the talk, please fill it out because then I can give more talks later. So thank you so much for coming, everyone who's heading out. And let's take some questions.
Hi, Matthew Lawrence, Rovio.
Hello.
Quick question on the prestiging mechanic. So it's actually really vital for player progression in the long run, but it's actually kind of an advanced level mechanism, and it always requires player interaction to do it. I've never seen one where it actually leads the player to do it like part of a tutorial, and I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how to kind of really encourage players to get that in the Fatui.
I don't know that I would get into the Fatui. Like you said, it's more of a later mechanic, so you do want to tutorialize it. But it's something that is a complexity level that you don't necessarily need to introduce right away. The games are often compelling and fun on their own in the core loop, and so players are sort of discovering and getting into that. And then when it becomes appropriate, so like in Adventure Capitalist, once you get to 50 angels, you would double your amount. And so at that point, we pop up a little thing and said, hey, now would be a good time to check out the prestige system and kind of introduce them to that. So I think the best way to do it is to contextualize it to when it's appropriate to the player. Don't introduce it too early because they're not even going to understand it, and they're already likely having fun. So I think it's mostly about just sort of targeting the tutorial at the right time.
Cool, thank you.
Hello.
Hey, so you spoke a little about how many people are buying these games and how many people are developing for these games. What's the ratio, like the saturation in this genre, and where do you see it going in the future?
And I'm sorry, I was asked to repeat the question. So the question was, what is the saturation of the genre? Where is it going into the future? It is starting to get somewhat saturated, especially with kind of like fast follows and clones. Those don't tend to have as much success. The most recent success for us has been Swarm Simulator, and that's one that really branched out and did something very different in its approach and in the economics of the game. So I think there is still opportunity for, that was 2 weeks ago. So obviously there is still, new ideas that are coming out. There is still iteration that is happening and evolution of the mechanics. It is something that is gaining attention. We've had multiple games in the idle genre are getting featured by the big platforms, which means a lot more people are going to be paying attention to it. It's a great experimentation and kind of breeding ground for ideas, and so we'll still see a lot, I think, coming out on browser. It's a little harder to get big on the web because or on mobile because you have to kind of go through the app stores, but I think there's still opportunity for the main idle genre, and then there's sort of the second layer of taking some of those approaches and wrapping them around, like the idle RPG or the idle match 3, where you're kind of providing a little more gameplay and then trying to balance that with some idle elements. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Over here.
You mentioned that these games require a lot of updating in order to stay fresh. Is that updating primarily on the late game or earlier game, or is it spread throughout the time or the levels that the player will be moving through?
Yeah, great question. So the question was, there are lots of updates in these games, but where are those focused? What do those updates look like? So a fair number of them are endgame, and it depends a little bit on how long the game is when you first launch it, but a lot of times players will get through it relatively quickly, and you do want to provide content at the end for those that have gotten there. A lot of the updates are UI and UX. You don't necessarily understand how players are going to interact with the game, especially the ones that get really hardcore about it. And so they'll start requesting things like, allow me to buy up to 100 of something and automatically determine what the right one is, and then show me my cash per second here. Like, there's a lot of requests about that, and so a lot of them are usability things that are helpful throughout the entire process. The early game often doesn't change much outside of maybe some balancing. Sometimes you find that when you did the bumpy, something was a bit too low, and so you may shift that up a little bit. But in general, you're going to be providing either something on the end or something that's a little parallel. With Anti-Idle, the one that's been going for like 6 years, he's actually just like adding new mechanics. So rather than just going on the end, he'll add like another way to, now there's a little fighting game in it, now there's a little collectible card game in it. He's kind of crazy. I don't know that's the best way to go it, and he's been doing it for 6 years, so he had to, have a little bit of variety. But yeah, it's really just sort of the the games, it's one that I think minimum viable product is very, very early on, and so a lot of the iteration is just sort of like public beta testing and something that's very easy to quickly iterate on. And so that's, I think, a little bit of what we're seeing with it.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you. Yes?
Hi, you mentioned that Kongregate has games from, Flash and HTML5 and Unity. Is there any particular type that tends to be more successful or just common for idle games? Are they all Flash or some HTML5? Or?
So yeah, the question was whether there's a particular technology that's better for idle games. I think I can almost firmly say no. Adventure Capitalist is Unity. Clicker Heroes is Flash. I think Idling to Rule the Gods is Flash. Swarm Simulator, I believe, is HTML5. So no, we actually don't see any real requirement there for one tech or another.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much. Again, please fill out your evaluations, and thanks for coming out.